It was a typical Thursday night when everything started to spiral out of control. The house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the dishwasher working its way through another load of dishes. I sat in my worn-out office chair, sweatpants on, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. The faint smell of burnt popcorn lingered in the air from earlier, reminding me of my failed attempt at an easy snack while working. My son Jake had just gone to bed, and I had been hoping to finish my work before crashing for the night, but instead my mind kept drifting. I thought about the little things: Jake's school projects, the upcoming weekend trip, the usual rush of life. Everything felt normal, mundane. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, the only sign that time was still moving. And then it happened. The knock at the door. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor asking for something small, like borrowing an egg. No, this knock was firm and rapid, the kind that made my heart skip a beat. I jumped out of my seat, looking at the clock again, confused. Who on earth would be knocking at my door this late? I moved cautiously toward the door, my pulse starting to race, unsure of what was waiting on the other side. When I opened it, I was met by two police officers standing on the porch. Both looked tired, their faces weathered, as though they'd been working long hours. Officer Daniel Harris, the taller of the two, was holding a clipboard and looked down at it like he wasn't sure if he had the right address. Officer Michelle Perez stood slightly behind him, her eyes soft but serious. "Ma'am," Officer Harris began, his voice flat. "Is your name Emily Carter?" I nodded, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth had become. "Yes," I said, my voice faltering slightly. Something in their demeanor told me that this wasn't a social visit. "We need to speak with your son." Officer Perez continued. "There was an incident tonight involving a car registered under your name. It was involved in a crash." My stomach lurched. "A crash? My son?" "What happened?" I asked, my voice almost breaking. "Your vehicle crashed into a light pole near your sister's house about 45 minutes ago," Harris explained. "The driver fled the scene, but witnesses at the scene identified your son." I felt my brain short-circuit. "Jake?" There was no way. "Jake?" I repeated, trying to make sense of it. "He was home. He's been in bed since 9. The officers exchanged a glance, and a wave of panic washed over me. "We need to speak with him," Officer Perez said gently. My heart started to race. Something wasn't right, and I needed to figure out what was happening. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, let me get him." I stepped back, leaving the door ajar as I walked down the hall to Jake's room, my mind spinning with questions. I knocked softly on his door, barely able to hold back my nerves. "Jake?" I whispered, my voice barely a murmur. He stirred in his bed, blinking in the dim light. "What's going on?" he asked, still half asleep. "There are some police officers at the door," I said. "They need to talk to you." His expression shifted from confusion to concern as he sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Why?" "They're saying there was an accident," I replied. "But I know you've been here all night." Jake nodded slowly, clearly bewildered. "I swear, I didn't drive the car, Mom." I tried to give him a reassuring smile, but it didn't feel genuine. "I know, sweetheart. Let's just talk to them." We walked back to the living room, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I guided Jake to the couch, standing in front of him as the officers approached, their presence suddenly heavy in the room. The tension was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. We stood there in the living room, the two officers looming in front of us. My hands were clammy, my heart pounding so hard I could almost feel it in my throat. Officer Harris spoke first, his voice surprisingly gentle, but his words felt like a hammer. "Jake Carter," he said, looking directly at my son. "Can you tell us where you've been tonight?" I stepped forward before Jake could answer, trying to keep the calm that was starting to slip away. "He's a minor," I said quickly, my voice shaking just a little. "He doesn't need to answer any questions without a lawyer present." Both officers looked at me, their expressions unreadable. I could feel the weight of their stares, like they were judging my every move. Officer Perez, the quieter one, nodded but didn't press the issue. "We just need to clarify some details," she said, her voice more neutral. "We just want to get the facts straight." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. It felt like a trap, a game where the rules kept changing, and I was trying to play catch-up. I crossed my arms over my chest and tried to steady myself. You said the car was involved in a crash. Where is it now? I asked, my voice still steady but edged with an underlying tension. In the impound lot, Harris replied. The front end was significantly damaged. It's totaled. I felt a tightness in my chest. I glanced at Jake, who was now pale, his eyes wide and uncertain. He hadn't even left the house, let alone taken the car out. He looked up at me, his voice barely a whisper. Mom, I didn't drive. I was here. I've been in my room all night. I know, baby, I said, my voice thick. I know. I turned back to the officers. There's no way he drove that car, I said firmly. He hasn't even left the house. I've been with him all night. Harris exchanged a look with Perez. We'll need to talk to your neighbors, Perez said, her tone now a little more clinical. Witnesses at the scene said they saw him leave before the crash. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Witnesses. I didn't know who these witnesses were, but I knew they weren't telling the truth. No, I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. I know who took that car, and it wasn't Jake. Jake's voice cracked, a mix of confusion and fear. Why would they say that about me, Mom? Why are they saying I did something I didn't do? I felt my stomach churn. My son had always been honest, responsible, and kind. He didn't deserve to be dragged into something like this. Someone out there is lying, Jake, I said, trying to keep my own emotions in check, and we'll find out who. I took a deep breath and turned back to the officers. Is that all? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Can we go now? The officers exchanged a glance, and I could tell they weren't done, but they didn't push. We'll need to follow up, Harris said. We'll be in touch. I nodded, my mind already racing, trying to process everything. As soon as the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I felt the weight of the situation sink into my bones. They had come here for answers, but none of this made sense. It couldn't be Jake. I walked back to the couch, sinking down beside Jake. He was staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. I reached over and put my arm around him, pulling him close. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt like a heavy fog. Mom, do you think they really think I did it? Jake asked quietly, his voice breaking the stillness. I rubbed his back gently, trying to reassure him, even though I wasn't sure how to reassure myself. I don't know, Jake, but we're going to fix this. You did nothing wrong, and we'll prove it. I'll make sure of it. He nodded, his shoulders slumping in relief, but I could see the uncertainty still in his eyes. I knew he wasn't the only one feeling lost in this mess. Whatever was happening, I was going to fight to make sure the truth came out. I didn't care who I had to take on. My son didn't deserve this. We didn't deserve this. And I would do whatever it took to set things right. The next morning, I barely slept, my mind running through every possibility of what might have happened. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, but the one thing that kept me focused was Jake. I needed to protect him. He was my responsibility, and I wasn't about to let anyone destroy his future over something he didn't do. After a tense breakfast, I picked up my phone and called a lawyer. Victor Hayes, a man known for his no-nonsense approach, answered the call. I gave him the short version: Jake, the crash, the false accusations, and he immediately set up a video consultation for later that afternoon. I was grateful. At least now we had a plan. While I waited for the meeting, I turned to something else I could control: finding evidence. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, determined to get answers. I went straight to my neighbor's house. Ben, the guy across the street, was a stickler for security cameras. He had them everywhere: porch lights, doorbells, and even one that pointed directly at my driveway. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. Of course, Emily, he said, already pulling up the footage on his tablet. Let's see what we've got. He scrubbed through the video, his finger sliding across the screen. And then there it was, the moment I'd been looking for. In the footage, the driveway was clearly visible, the silver car parked in its usual spot. But then, my sister Claire came into view. She walked out of the front door alone, her head down as if she was trying to avoid the camera. She had the keys in her hand, and without hesitation, she opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. No Jake, just Claire, leaving the driveway. Ben froze the frame and pointed to it. "Isn't that your sister?" he asked, looking up at me. I nodded, my stomach churning. "That's her," I whispered. It wasn't Jake. It was Claire. She had taken the car, and she had crashed it. I pulled out my phone, sent the clip to Victor, and made a mental note to gather everything I could to prove Jake's innocence. I couldn't stop thinking about the lies my family had told. How could they do this to him? To us? At noon, I sat in front of my lap trying to steady my nerves as I waited for Victor's call. When it came, his voice was calm but direct. I've got the footage, Emily. It's solid, but we need more. More? I asked, feeling the pressure mounting. We need proof that Jake was home that night. Can you get his phone records or any kind of screen activity, anything that shows he wasn't at the scene of the crash? It was a good idea. I immediately texted Jake's friend Noah, asking if he could send me their group chat from last night. Jake had been texting with him for hours, and it was a perfect alibi. I also pulled up his screen time and messages. There it was. Texts, memes, random conversations with timestamps that lined up perfectly with the time the officers said the crash occurred. Jake had been at home, just like I had said. Victor emailed me back shortly. This is enough, he said. Let's meet in person and take it from there. The next day, we sat in his office, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. Victor went over the details again, confirming that we had a solid case. The security footage, Jake's phone records, everything pointed to the same conclusion. My sister had taken the car, not Jake. But there was still a lingering fear. If Claire and my parents stuck to their story, if they refused to back down, we would be stuck in a battle that wasn't about to end easily. I couldn't help but feel like I was fighting not just for Jake's future, but for the truth itself. 3 days later, we were in a sterile conference room at the police station. My parents, Claire, and I sat on opposite sides of the table. The tension was suffocating. I could barely look at them, knowing they had lied. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. Detective Matthews opened the folder in front of her, turning it toward everyone. This is the security footage from the neighbors, she said. It shows Claire taking the car, not Jake. I glanced over at Claire. Her face went white. My parents' eyes shifted uneasily. They knew they were cornered. Detective Matthews looked at my parents. You stated you saw Jake behind the wheel. Would you like to amend your statements? My mother's voice cracked. We assumed it was Jake. It was dark. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said, her voice barely audible. I just panicked. Her words didn't even faze me. The truth was clear. The damage was done, and I wasn't going to back down. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. I couldn't take my eyes off Claire. Her face was pale, and her hands fidgeted in her lap, but not once did she look at me. My parents sat across the table, looking like they had no idea how to react. It felt like everything had shifted in the room, and I could almost hear the walls closing in on them. Detective Matthews kept her gaze fixed on the evidence in front of her. We have security footage showing Claire taking the car, not Jake. We also have phone records confirming Jake was home. Your statements don't match the evidence. My mother blinked rapidly, her eyes darting between the footage and me. We assumed it was Jake, she said, her voice weak. It was dark, and we didn't know for sure. Assumed? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady, but the anger crept in despite my best efforts. You saw a kid driving, and you just assumed it was him? My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. He never did when it mattered. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew they'd messed up. Claire shifted uncomfortably, her mascara smudged under her eyes. She started, but the words caught in her throat. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't mean for everything to blow up like this. She was trying to get sympathy, trying to backpedal, but I wasn't buying it. The damage had been done. She had driven the car, crashed it, and then, out of fear, fed a lie to protect herself. And now my son, my child, had almost paid the price for it. I don't want your apology, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to make this better with an I'm sorry now. You made a choice. You made a choice to lie, and you chose to put my son in danger. The room fell silent again. I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on me, but it didn't matter. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let them turn this around on me. Detective Matthews turned her attention to Claire. Your statement claims you saw Jake behind the wheel. Do you stand by that? Claire's eyes darted to my parents, but they said nothing. She hesitated, her voice breaking. "No," she whispered. "I wasn't thinking. I panicked. I thought I could fix it." "Well, you didn't," I snapped. "And now you've got us all tangled up in your mess." I glanced at my parents. They had no excuses left, no explanations. They had chosen to back Claire, to pretend she wasn't responsible, and now they were paying the price for it. "You were supposed to protect Jake. You were supposed to protect him from this. Instead, you chose to protect Claire. And look where we are now." My mother's face was flushed with embarrassment, and my father just stared at the folder in front of him, his lips pressed into a tight line. "Jake is cleared of all charges," Detective Matthews said, her voice a finality. "There will be no criminal action against him, but we will be reviewing the false statements made by your family, and there will be consequences for that." My parents didn't look at me. They didn't even look at each other. They just stared at the table, the weight of their actions finally catching up with them. I could feel the bitterness in the air, bitter with regret, but also with something else. Guilt. They were guilty. And it was too late for them to pretend otherwise. The detective turned to me. "Anything else you'd like to say, Emily?" I swallowed hard, the sting of everything still fresh. I stood up, my voice steady, though every word felt like a weight I was forcing myself to carry. "I've spent my whole life trying to be the bigger person, trying to understand why my family does what they do, trying to be the responsible one. But you don't get to ask me to swallow this. You don't get to throw my son under the bus to save face." I looked at my parents, finally meeting their eyes. "You signed your names to a lie. You chose to protect your precious daughter, and now you'll face the consequences for it. I don't know if that makes you proud, but I hope it's worth it." Claire's face twisted, her mascara smudged as she fought back tears. My mother's lips trembled, but she said nothing. And my father, the man who'd always told me to be strong, couldn't even look me in the eye. "We'll be in touch," Detective Matthews said, closing the folder and standing. "Thank you for your time, Emily. You and your son are free to go." I nodded, turning to Jake. He was sitting there, looking small but resolute, his hand clenched in mine. We didn't need to say anything. The silence between us was enough. We had made it through. Outside, I breathed deeply, the fresh air filling my lungs. Jake was quiet, but he squeezed my hand as we walked to the car. For the first time in days, the tension in my chest started to lift. We had won this fight. We had told the truth, and it had finally been enough. And as for my family, well, their consequences were just beginning. But I knew one thing for sure. They would never break us. Not again. It had been a week since that meeting at the police station, but the weight of everything still sat heavily on my shoulders. I was still processing the fallout, still trying to wrap my head around what had happened and how it had all turned out the way it did. I'd spent years trying to be the one who kept things together, trying to be the responsible one, and it had always been expected of me. But in the end, it wasn't enough. My parents, my sister, all of them had chosen to protect themselves and let Jake take the fall. And that was something I couldn't let go of. Jake was doing better, though. Much better. I'd seen it in the way he held his head a little higher, in the way his shoulders were no longer slumped. He'd always been a quiet kid, the kind of child who would do anything to avoid confrontation. But now I saw him standing a little taller, the weight of the world finally lifting off his shoulders. He didn't deserve any of this, but at least now, the truth was out there. At least now, he could breathe again. We hadn't heard from my parents, and honestly, I didn't expect to. Not right away, at least. I was still reeling from everything that had come out in the open, and I wasn't sure how to feel about them anymore. I hadn't called them, and they hadn't called me. It was a strange, uncomfortable silence that hung between us, like we were all waiting for the next shoe to drop. And then, a few days later, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence between us stretch on. But the other part, the part that still clung to the hope that things could somehow go back to normal, knew I needed to pick up. So I did. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Emily," my mother's voice came through, soft and tentative. "We need to talk." My heart raced. I hadn't expected her to reach out. Not like this. Not after everything. About what? I asked, my words coming out more sharply than I intended. About what happened with Jake, she said. There was a long pause, like she was choosing her words carefully. I just want to say that we're sorry. We didn't handle it right, and I don't want to lose you over this. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. I hadn't expected an apology, not really. But hearing it now, I wasn't sure what to feel. You lied to the police, Mom, I said, my voice thick with the hurt I'd been holding on to. You let Jake take the blame for something he didn't do. I know, she said quietly, and I regret it. I was wrong. Your father and I, we panicked. We didn't want to believe Claire could do something like that, but we see now how wrong we were. The words didn't make the pain go away, but they did something else. They opened up the door, just a crack, for something resembling reconciliation. Maybe that's what I had been waiting for, even though I hadn't realized it until now. Maybe I had been waiting for them to acknowledge the damage they had caused. I can't just forget what happened, I said softly. You made a choice. You made a choice to protect Claire, and you hurt Jake in the process. That's not something I can just overlook. I understand, she replied, her voice shaky, but I want to make it right, Emily. I want to fix this. I'm not asking you to forget, but I'm asking for the chance to make amends. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I don't know, Mom, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time. I'll give you time, but I want you to know that I love you, both of you, and I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't know if I could forgive her yet, or if I ever would. But I knew that for the first time she was being honest with me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward healing. I'll think about it, I said quietly, but it's going to take time, for me and for Jake. I understand. Just know that I'm here when you're ready. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long while, my mind spinning. It felt like a small step, but it was something. Maybe that's all we could hope for right now. Small steps. Jake came into the room a few minutes later, his face carefully neutral. Who was it? He asked. My mom, I said, my voice low. She apologized. Jake nodded slowly. What did you say? I told her it's going to take time, I said, meeting his gaze. But I'll figure it out. We both will. He didn't say anything else, but I could tell he was thinking. He had been through so much over the past week, and I knew he was trying to make sense of everything too. But for now, we had each other, and that was enough. We'd take it one step at a time. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, questions, and uncertainty. I wasn't sure if I was processing the fallout from my parents' betrayal or just trying to keep my own head above water. Jake was adjusting, but I could tell the weight of everything still lingered in his quiet moments. He wasn't the type to wear his emotions on his sleeve, but I knew my son. He was trying to make sense of the fact that his own family had thrown him under the bus to protect someone else. We hadn't heard from my parents after that phone call. No texts, no follow-ups. The silence had stretched longer than I thought it would. And yet, part of me wasn't surprised. I had expected them to retreat into themselves, to hope that time would heal everything. But I wasn't sure it worked that way. Not when trust had been shattered so completely. It was a Friday afternoon when my phone rang again. I wasn't expecting it this time, and when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was my father. I stared at the phone for a moment, torn between answering and hanging up. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance, to avoid whatever it was he might say. But then another part of me, the part that still clung to the hope of repair, knew I had to answer. So I did. Hello? My voice sounded tentative, unsure, as I pressed the phone to my ear. Emily? My father's voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken much in the past few days. I just wanted to talk about everything. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the couch. What is there to talk about? I asked, my words coming out more sharply than I intended. You chose to protect Claire, and you hurt Jake in the process. How do we fix that? I know, he said quietly. I know I messed up. I don't know what I was thinking, but I didn't want to lose Claire. I was wrong. I took a breath, trying to gather my thoughts. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there, simmering just beneath the surface. You don't get to just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal, Dad, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You lied. You made us all part of this lie, and you thought it was easier to protect Claire than it was to protect the truth. I was scared, he admitted, his voice cracking. I didn't know how to fix it, how to protect the family. I thought if we just kept up the story, everything would blow over. But I see now how wrong that was. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had hurt Jake. But another part of me, the part that still carried the weight of family, simply didn't know if I could keep carrying that weight. I had spent years protecting them, trying to be the glue that held everything together, but now I wasn't sure where the pieces fit anymore. I'm not sure what to say, Dad, I said finally, my voice small. You lied. You put Jake through hell. You put all of us through hell. I understand, he replied quietly, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I want to make it right. I could feel the walls closing in, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I wanted to say something, to tell him that it was going to be okay, that we'd figure it out, but I didn't know if I could. Not yet. I don't know if we can fix this right away, I said slowly, but I'll think about it. I need time. Jake needs time. We all need time. I understand, he said again. I'll give you all the time you need. The conversation ended on a quiet note, and I sat there for a while, staring at the phone in my hand. It felt like something shifted between us. Maybe not enough to heal the wounds, but enough to start the process. I wasn't sure what the future held for us or if things could ever go back to the way they were. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done pretending. The truth had come to light, and no matter what happened next, I was going to protect my son, protect myself. We deserved that. Jake walked into the living room just then, looking at me with that cautious expression he always wore when something was on his mind. Who was it? He asked quietly. It was Grandpa, I said, my voice soft. He called. He apologized. Jake didn't say anything at first. He just nodded and sat down beside me. I could feel the weight of everything in the room, but for the first time in days, it didn't feel as heavy. Maybe we weren't okay yet, but we were getting there. Slowly, but surely. Do you think you'll forgive them? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I said, my eyes meeting his, but I know I'm not going to let their mistakes define us. He nodded, resting his head on my shoulder. We didn't need more words. We just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. It had been a few weeks since the phone call with my father, and while the silence between us hadn't been broken completely, there was something different in the air now. The weight of the lies had started to lift, but there was still a heaviness that lingered. Jake and I were adjusting to the new normal, but it was hard not to feel the cracks that had formed. They were still there, buried just beneath the surface. I spent a lot of my time trying to focus on Jake, making sure he was okay, making sure he felt safe again. It was hard to explain what had happened to him, the way he had been caught in the middle of a mess that wasn't his fault. But he was resilient, stronger than I gave him credit for, and he handled everything better than I expected. He'd started to come out of his shell a bit, laughing again with his friends, going to school without that constant anxiety weighing on his shoulders. I saw the old Jake, the one who didn't hesitate to smile, even if it was just a small one. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, Jake and I were sitting on the couch, the quiet of the house almost comforting after a long week. He had his headphones on, scrolling through his phone, when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. The name on the screen made my stomach turn. It was my mother. I hadn't heard from her since the police meeting, and honestly, I hadn't been sure if I was ready for any kind of conversation with her. But as much as I hated to admit it, the part of me that still wanted to make things right, no matter how broken the situation was, knew I had to answer. I picked up the phone and hesitated before pressing it to my ear. Hello? Emily? Her voice came through, hesitant but softer than I'd expected. I know it's been a while and I've been giving you space, but I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jake doing? I bit back a sharp response, a flood of emotions threatening to spill over. We're doing fine, I said, my tone carefully neutral. Jake's doing better, and I'm managing. But, things are still complicated. I know, she said quietly. I don't expect everything to be okay right away. I wanted to say again how sorry I am. I never should have lied about what happened. I was just so focused on Claire, and I didn't think about what it would do to Jake, to you. I see that now. I took a deep breath, trying to process the words. They didn't undo the hurt, didn't fix the damage, but it was the first time I had heard her take full responsibility for her actions. It was a start, but I wasn't sure it was enough. You hurt us, Mom, I said, my voice quieter now. You hurt Jake and you hurt me. It's going to take more than an apology for me to trust you again. I don't know when or if that will happen. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, and for a moment I wondered if she would hang up. But instead, she said softly, I understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now, but I want you to know I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I didn't know how to respond. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I still felt, but I didn't have the words for it. Part of me still wanted to protect her, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was finally getting it. But another part of me was scared to let that guard down again. I didn't want to be hurt again. I'm not ready to talk about it, Mom, I said, finally breaking the silence. But I'll think about it. I need time. I understand, she said quietly. Take all the time you need, but just know I love you, and I'm here whenever you're ready. I didn't say anything for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She had said this before, but this time, it felt different. Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice, or maybe it was just the fact that I had finally heard what I needed to hear. I'll let you know, I said finally, my voice softer than before. I'll let you know when I'm ready. I hung up the phone and sat there for a while, my mind racing with everything that had been said. Jake glanced up from his phone, sensing the shift in the room. Everything okay, Mom? He asked, his voice tentative. I nodded, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Yeah, I said, my voice quiet. Everything's fine. He didn't push it. He didn't need to. For now, we were both learning to live with the uncertainty. But one thing was clear. I was learning how to put my family's mistakes in perspective. I wasn't ready to forgive yet, but maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing, room for me to figure out what came next. For now, I would focus on the one thing I knew I could control, making sure Jake felt safe and loved. And in time, maybe the rest would fall into place. Life's messy. People mess up, families mess up, and sometimes things fall apart. But here's the truth. It's okay to take your time to process, heal, and protect what matters. Don't let anyone dictate your worth or rush you through tough times. And hey, when life hands you lemons, don't just make lemonade. Add some vodka, enjoy the process, and learn from it. So take a moment, laugh a little, and remember, growth takes time. If you enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, drop a comment. Let's make this family drama a little more entertaining together.